I'm Corbett Wall with DV Auction, here with the cattle market summary for the week ending May the 1st. With that bearish cattle on feed report they had last Friday that came out with 100% on feed totals as of April the 1st, 100% placed and maybe just a little bit more than what they had a year ago, but still 100%. And marketing's of 98%, but the placement number was pretty bearish. But that was pretty much shrugged off. That early week sharply lower board starting out on Monday there was pretty much all shrugged off by your feeder cattle interest, and just continued resiliency of this cash feeder cattle market that's just impressed ever since this rally began, and continues to impress, and kind of hard to figure really. Guys are buying cattle that won't hedge. They know we're going into a down market on the fed cattle trade. They know that the numbers are going to pick up down the road, but we're still in short numbers of feeder cattle, and pretty much guys that have grown and fed feeder cattle have made a lot of money on them the last few rounds, and they want to stay in on them. That's the way they know to make money, and they just want to stay in and keep their pens full, and that's what keeps holding it up. But yearling feeder cattle sold firm to $5 higher. Calves were kind of uneven, ranging from $5 lower to $5 higher, and it had a lot to do with the kind of calves we're getting into now. A lot of balling calves, or maybe little peewee calves, and not any nice big strings of hard weaned calves really to speak of. And so where those weaned calves did show up, they might be a little higher, where the others showed up a little lower. Still some guys picking around on them, but most of your grass interests are full. But last week's early trading session in your fed cattle arena really lent a lot of support to your feeder cattle market this week, your cash feeders this week. And pretty much all classes of cattle, the market on them, the way they sell is just a derivative of your fat cattle trade. Every little thing that happens in the fat cattle trade, even though we continue to preach about how narrow that negotiated trade is, everything that goes on in the fat cattle trade, something's going to respond to that. And the way that the packers came in the middle of last week, and then they kept buying cattle and even bought cattle late in the week, higher than they did early in the week. Little things like that are really a strong signal to these guys that are buying cash feeders the following week, and that's what happened this week. But you know, on your packers, April is now over. We're ending that. Your packers knew that there was going to be an extremely tight supply of market-ready cattle in April. They had a lot of contracts for April. Most all of those cattle have been pulled in and they've been slaughtered now. And now we're moving on into May, which, you know, they're always going to have some contracts there, but not as heavily as they did in April. And we're getting into some heavier market-ready supplies, but still these packers have really got to ramp up this kill. They need to get up to 600,000 a week and over that if they can. They need to get their workers getting full 40-hour weeks in. They need to start hanging some meat, getting some into cold storage and things like that. And they're doing that, so they're still aggressive for cattle. And as we're getting into heavier cattle supplies, the dressed weights on those cattle are in their seasonal decline, and the grading on those cattle is not going to be as good. Not as many choice and prime cattle, because we're getting into those calf-fed cattle that were placed late last fall. And if you remember coming out of the videos and your direct sales and your sale barns, just a lot of cattle moving late last fall there, and all those cattle got put on feed. Well, they're coming off right now, and they're not going to grade as well as those hard yearling cattle and those bigger, heavier weight cattle that are put on other times of the year. But the biggest information that come out of that cattle on feed report, and one thing that I thought was very important, is even though we had about the same number of cattle in the feed lot as we did the same time a year ago, there were 5% more steers and 10% less heifers. Well, that gives you an awful good idea of how many heifers have been kept for replacement. A lot of your grass pastures, a lot of those and those big pastures out in the Flint Hills, your big vast grazing regions there's a lot of replacement heifers out there. A lot of heifers being bred out there. And so probably the last place that we're going to see real tight supplies of cattle as we get through this record-breaking cycle is going to be probably a shortage of green feeder cattle, yearlings, coming off that late summer and early fall pasture, because so many of them are going to be heifers. And so we expect that the market's going to be pretty good on those. Not a lot of contracting of those as of yet. And the feeder board is just so far from what cash is all the time, let alone out front. It's not really a good indicator. And your asking prices and what guys really want to give for those cattle that far out is a long ways apart. And not many of those guys coming together as of yet, even though your feedlots' mouths just water whenever they drive down through that country and see all those yearlings out there eating grass only, and they know how good those cattle are going to feed. But we saw your prices go up a lot this week on Cattle Market Central, our real-time index that kind of mirrors your CME feeder cattle index. It gained $7 this week, and that's off of an automated reporting system there. We saw in Phillips, South Dakota on Tuesday there, we had the top selling load of steers weighed 813 pounds at 221. That's similar to those record prices that we saw months ago. But you had that load of steers weighed 813 at 221. That was only $5 or $6 a hundred better than some replacement quality heifers weighing about the same in there. They had over 150 of those weighing from 8 to 850, and they bring $1,760 to $1,800 per head. So guys are still really pushing for replacement quality heifers, even though there's a world of them turned out, and the market's probably going to be flooded with bred heifers coming up in the fourth quarter of this year. And there's going to be a lot of them, and we're probably going to overproduce, and we get into 2016 and beyond. Guy really wants to hang on to his Wranglers, because this thing's going to fade fast, because they are going to be breeding a lot of heifers, and then they're going to be young cows for a long time. But this week's fed cattle session didn't develop near as fast as last week's, and like we talked earlier, every little thing about it, well, packers realize that too, and they're going to hold out as long as they can. They don't want everybody thinking this thing's going to get better all of a sudden. But we did have some sales there Thursday come in from 157 to 158. That's just a pinch lower, or a little bit weaker than last week's trade, and the same as a lot of last week's trade. So, well, it's yet to be seen how the whole deal will end up, but they're going to come out and try to buy some cattle real late in the week there. But your packers they're back to making money, but they're struggling to get these beef prices any higher. Wholesalers have really been holding back on wanting to give new record prices for the middle meats there. But the trimmings and the stuff that they make hamburger out of is really holding this thing up as much as anything, because there's going to be a big shortage of cows and bulls. We've whittled these herds to where they're so young, there's just not a lot of old cows and bulls coming in. And we're getting to the sale barn season. Most of those come out of the sale barns, where the sale barns are winding down. They're not going to have a lot of numbers there. And with green grass showing up everywhere, not a lot of reason to sell off cows and bulls. But that pretty much wraps up your cattle market summary for this week. Check out dvauction.com for assortment of all kinds of sales and this information and more. Also get this report on the stockexchangenews.com. So from a home DV auction office here in Maysville, Missouri, we'll talk to you next week.